Here's something they are not teaching in school, not saying on the evening news, and not trending on social media, even though it should be breaking every single platform right now. The United States of America just went to war. Not a skirmish, not a drone strike on a random desert outpost in the middle of nowhere. A full-scale military operation, coordinated with a foreign government, targeting one of the most strategically dangerous nations on the planet. In Congress, they found out the same way you did. On the news, no vote, no authorization, no debate on the Senate floor. The people elected specifically to decide whether American sons and daughters go to war were bypassed completely. And the White House isn't just defending that decision, they are celebrating it. If nobody in your life is explaining this to you, if your news feed isn't breaking this down in plain English, that is exactly why this channel exists. Hit subscribe right now. Because what we do here at Senate Decoded is what journalism used to do before it got comfortable. We decode the laws, the loopholes, the power moves, and the political language that Washington uses to confuse you on purpose. You deserve to understand what is being done in your name. Join this movement, hit subscribe, and let's get into it. Let's start at the beginning because you need the full picture before any of this makes sense. On March 3rd, 2026, the United States military, operating in coordination with Israeli forces, launched a series of strikes targeting Iran, not Iranian proxies, not a militia operating on Iran's behalf in Syria or Iraq or Yemen. Iran itself, the country, its capital, smoke rising over Tehran. Now, I want you to hold that image in your mind for a second because we have become so desensitized to the phrase military strike that sometimes we forget what it actually means. It means bombs. It means missiles. It means men and women in uniform executing a mission that carries real risk and real consequences on the global stage. The Pentagon confirmed American casualties. They are calling the operation Operation Epic Fury. And the White House wasted no time getting in front of the cameras to make sure the narrative was controlled before the questions started rolling in. Enter Stephen Miller. If you don't know who Stephen Miller is, here's the 30-second version. He is one of the most powerful, most ideologically committed people in the Trump White House. His title is Deputy Chief of Staff for Policy, but what that really means is he is one of the architects of the Trump administration's worldview. When Miller speaks, he is not freelancing. He is delivering the message the White House wants America to hear. And the message he delivered this week was this: the U.S. military has been unleashed. His words, not my spin, not a headline writer's shorthand. He sat down on national television and said, and I'm going to break this down line by line, that under previous administrations, the military was forced to fight a less than full fight, that there was a woke Pentagon operating at the very highest levels that constrained the military from using what he called its full lethal prowess. He said, quote, that the military is now free to go out and seek, destroy, and kill the enemy. Now, let's decode that, because embedded inside that language is a very specific political argument, and it's one that has massive implications for how this country uses military force going forward, and who gets to decide when it's used. Miller is making two claims at once. Claim number one: the military was previously weakened by politics, specifically by what he's calling woke ideology at the leadership level. Claim number two: Trump has now removed those constraints, and the result is a more powerful, more effective, more decisive military that will actually defend American interests. That is the framing. That is the message. Now, here's the part the White House is hoping you don't think too hard about. Here is where it gets serious. Here is where we go from political messaging to constitutional law, because this is Senate Decoded, and we don't just react, we decode. The Constitution of the United States is very clear on one thing: the power to declare war belongs to Congress. Article 1, Section 8, you can look it up. It's not buried in some obscure footnote. It is one of the foundational pillars of how this country is supposed to operate. The founders were terrified of giving a single person, and a king, a president, anyone, the unchecked power to send the nation to war. So they split it. The president commands the military, but Congress authorizes its use in actual armed conflict. Now, and here's where it gets complicated. Congress passed something in 1973 called the War Powers Resolution. This came after Vietnam, after years of presidents doing exactly what critics say Trump is doing right now, committing troops to combat without a formal declaration of war. The War Powers Resolution says the president must notify Congress within 48 hours of deploying forces into hostilities, and that those forces must be withdrawn within 60 to 90 days unless Congress authorizes the action. So technically, a president can act first and then inform Congress. That is the loophole that every administration since 1973 has used to justify military action without a formal vote. Reagan used it. Clinton used it. Obama used it. Bush used it after 9/11, though he did get an authorization for use of military force afterward. But here is what makes the Iran situation different, and why lawmakers on both sides of the aisle are alarmed. This was not a limited strike on a terrorist cell. This was not a defensive response to an imminent attack on American soil. This was a coordinated offensive military operation with a foreign country targeting the government and military infrastructure of a sovereign nation that, whatever you think of its regime, has not directly attacked the United States on American soil. That is a significant line to cross, and Congress, specifically the Senate, is now wrestling with what to do about it. Now, here is the part of the story that the media is flattening, because nuance doesn't get clicks, and complex coalitions don't fit neatly into red team versus blue team. The opposition to how these strikes were authorized is not just coming from Democrats. Let me say that again because it matters. There are Republicans, sitting Republican senators and members of Congress, who are raising serious concerns about whether the president had the authority to do what he did without a vote. These are members of the party's more traditional, limited government, non-interventionist wing, people who campaigned on the idea that America should not be getting into endless foreign wars, people who took America first to mean America stays out of other countries' business, not America bombs other countries without a congressional debate. That tension is real. It has always existed inside the Republican Party, and it is now cracking open in a very public way. On the Democratic side, the criticism is sharper and more unified, and it centers almost entirely on process, not policy. Many Democrats who privately or publicly believe that Iran's regime is dangerous are still arguing that the way this was done sets a dangerous precedent, that if a president can unilaterally strike a foreign government without congressional authorization, then the War Powers Clause of the Constitution is essentially a dead letter. It exists on paper. It means nothing in practice. And that argument, the process argument, is actually the more powerful one, because it is not about whether Iran is dangerous. It's about who decides. Miller's speech on Hannity wasn't just political spin. Buried inside his rhetoric is a legitimate historical grievance, and to be intellectually honest with you, we have to acknowledge that. He rattled off a list, and the list is real. 1979, Iranian revolutionaries stormed the U.S. Embassy in Tehran and held 52 Americans hostage for 444 days. That wound has never fully healed in the American political psyche. 1983, a bombing in Beirut killed 241 American Marines. U.S. intelligence has long attributed that attack to Hezbollah, an organization with deep ties to and funding from Iran. Across decades, Iranian-backed proxy forces have attacked American troops stationed in Iraq, Syria, and across the region. Hundreds of American service members have been killed or wounded in attacks that U.S. officials trace back to Iranian weapons, Iranian training, and Iranian orders. And for decades, the argument inside Washington has been, at what point does that add up to an act of war? At what point does the United States stop responding to Iran's proxies and start responding to Iran itself? That is not a crazy question. It is a legitimate strategic debate. But here is the other side of that coin. And this is where serious foreign policy experts on the left and the right are sounding alarms. Striking Iran directly is not the end of a conflict. It may be the beginning of one. Iran has the capability and the stated willingness to retaliate. It has proxy forces across the region. It has relationships with Russia and China that give it diplomatic cover. And if this escalates, if Iran retaliates against American forces, against Israel, against regional allies, then we are not talking about a limited operation anymore. We are talking about a war, a real war, in the most volatile region on Earth. And Congress has not authorized it. Let's talk about the phrase America first for a moment, because Miller used it repeatedly, and it is doing a lot of heavy lifting in this political moment. When Donald Trump first ran for president in 2016, America First had a specific meaning in the minds of many of his supporters. It meant stop sending American treasure and American blood into foreign conflicts that don't serve American interests. Stop nation building. Stop playing global policeman. Bring the troops home. Fix the problems here before fixing the problems over there. That version of America First was deeply appealing to a large swath of Americans who were exhausted by 2 decades of war in Iraq and Afghanistan. Wars that cost trillions of dollars and thousands of lives and left the region no more stable than it was before. Now listen to how Miller defines it. He says America First means America will be the greatest, most unquestioned, unmatched power in the world. He says it means we will avenge American blood. He is explicitly rejecting what he calls isolationism, and in doing so, he is redefining the doctrine in real time. That is a significant shift, and it is one that the more libertarian, non-interventionist voices in the conservative movement, people like Rand Paul, people aligned with that tradition, are pushing back against hard. Because if America First now means America strikes first when the president decides it's necessary, that is a fundamentally different foreign policy than what many voters thought they were signing up for. This is not a partisan observation. This is a definitional one, and the Senate is going to have to wrestle with it. So what can Congress actually do? Because I know that is the question burning in the back of your mind right now. The honest answer is it's complicated, and that complexity is by design. Option 1, Congress could pass a resolution demanding the withdrawal of forces. The problem is that even if such a resolution passed, which would require bipartisan support, the president can veto it, and overriding that veto requires a two-thirds majority in both chambers. In today's political environment, that is a nearly impossible bar to clear. Option 2, Congress could pass a new authorization for use of military force in an AUMF that specifically defines the scope and limits of military action against Iran. This is what many constitutional scholars say should have happened before the strikes. It would give the operation legal footing while also imposing some limits on escalation. The challenge here is political will. Getting both chambers to agree on the language, the limits, and the mission in a moment of high tension is enormously difficult. Option 3, Congress could use the power of the purse. They control the budget. They could theoretically restrict funding for operations not specifically authorized. But this approach is politically toxic, and nobody wants to be accused of defunding troops in the field, and it has rarely worked in practice. Option 4, and this is the one that is getting serious discussion on Capitol Hill right now, the Senate Foreign Relations Committee could hold public hearings, force administration officials to testify under oath, put the decision-making process on the record, create accountability, and in doing so, shape public opinion in a way that constrains the executive's room to maneuver. That is not as dramatic as a vote to declare war. But in the current political environment, it may be the most realistic lever Congress has. Here is the moment in the video where I need to zoom out, because this story is not really just about Iran, or about Stephen Miller, or about this particular set of strikes in March 2026. This is about a pattern, a decades-long pattern of executive power expanding and congressional authority shrinking when it comes to war. Think about it. The Gulf of Tonkin Resolution in 1964 gave Lyndon Johnson essentially blank check authority to escalate in Vietnam, based on an incident that was later revealed to be, at best, deeply misunderstood and, at worst, deliberately manipulated. The 2001 authorization for use of military force, passed 3 days after 9/11, gave the executive branch authority to pursue those responsible for the attacks. That one authorization has been stretched and reinterpreted to justify military operations in over a dozen countries for more than 2 decades. The 2003 invasion of Iraq was sold to Congress and the American people on the basis of intelligence about weapons of mass destruction that turned out not to exist. Each of those moments represented an expansion of executive war-making authority, and in each case, Congress, after the initial moment of crisis, struggled to claw back the power it had given away or allowed to be taken. What we are watching right now in the Iran situation is the latest chapter of that story. The question is whether Congress, this time, will find the will to reassert its constitutional role, or whether it will once again watch from the sidelines as the executive branch makes decisions that the founders explicitly said should require a vote. History is watching, and so are you. I want to take a second and talk to you directly because sometimes this stuff can feel very far away. Explosions in Tehran, Senate committees, war powers resolutions from 1973, it can feel abstract, like it's happening in a world that has nothing to do with your Tuesday morning. But here's the truth. The decision to go to war or not to go to war is the most consequential decision a government can make. It affects the economy, it affects your fuel prices, your grocery prices, the stability of the global financial system. It affects whether young men and women you know come home in one piece. It affects the way the rest of the world sees and treats the United States, which affects American businesses, American travelers, American diplomats, and the question of who gets to make that decision, one person in the Oval Office or 535 elected representatives in Congress, is not a procedural technicality. It is the difference between a republic and something else. The founders knew this. That is why they put war powers in Article 1, the legislative article, not Article 2, the executive one. They wanted that decision to be hard. They wanted it to require debate. They wanted it to require building a coalition of support because they understood that the easiest thing in the world for a powerful leader to do is start a war, and the hardest thing and the most important thing is to stop one. You should be engaged in this conversation, not because of who the president is, not because of which party is in power, but because this is your country, your military, your money, your future. So where does this go from here? In the short term, the world is watching how Iran responds. If Iran retaliates against American military bases in the region, against Israel through its proxy networks in Lebanon, Iraq, Syria, or Yemen, then the scope of this conflict expands rapidly. And at that point, the question of congressional authorization stops being theoretical. It becomes urgent, because you cannot fight an expanding war through a legal gray zone forever. In the medium term, the Senate Foreign Relations Committee is expected to hold hearings. Watch those closely. The senators who ask the hardest questions and the administration officials who either answer them or dodge them will tell you everything you need to know about where the institutional guardrails of American democracy stand right now. In the long term, this moment will be studied in law schools, in political science departments, in military academies. Because whatever happens next, the decision to strike Iran without a congressional vote and the political argument that followed defending that decision represents a new marker in the ongoing argument over the limits of executive power. And the next president, whoever they are, whatever party, will inherit either a stronger or a weaker congressional check on their war-making authority, depending on what Congress does right now. That is the stakes. That is why this matters. I want to leave you with one question to sit with. If the power to declare war, one of the gravest decisions a nation can make, doesn't actually require a vote from the people's elected representatives anymore, what does that say about who is really governing this country? That is not a rhetorical question designed to make you angry at one party or the other. It is a genuine question about the structure of American democracy, about checks and balances, about whether the system the founders built is still functioning the way they intended, and the answer, whatever it is, should matter to every single person watching this, regardless of how they voted, regardless of what they think about Iran, regardless of what cable news channel they watch at night. This is Senate Decoded. We don't tell you what to think. We give you the tools to think for yourself. We translate the legislation, decode the political language, and expose the power moves that the people making them are betting you won't notice. If this video gave you something, a new angle, a clearer picture, a question worth asking, then do 3 things for me right now. First, subscribe. Hit that button. Because we are just getting started, and the stories we are going to decode in the coming weeks are going to be even more important than this one. Second, share this video with one person in your life who you know is paying attention to what's happening, but who isn't getting the full story. Be the person who sends them something worth watching. Third, drop a comment below. Tell me, do you think the president should have sought congressional authorization before striking Iran? Yes or no? And why? I read every single comment. Your voice matters here. This is Senate Decoded. Stay informed, stay engaged, and never stop asking questions. I'll see you in the next one.